Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. This is your second lecture of physics. In this lecture, I am going to discuss waves, which is a topic of chapter number 10 of 10th class. In this lecture, we will study waves, types of waves, and its properties or characteristics. In order to refresh your knowledge, I'll tell you about vibratory motion. It is a to and fro motion of a body about its mean position. As you can see in the animation, that a spring is moving about its mean position. Now come towards the lecture. In simple words, what actually are the waves? Waves are produced by disturbing a medium. As you can see in the animation, that a particle moves up and down about its mean position in orange circle. It will continue its motion about the mean position and transfer energy from one particle to another particle. But in order to justify or define a wave, we need a proper definition, and it is going to be defined that a wave is a disturbance in a medium which causes the particles of the medium to undergo vibratory motion about their mean position in equal intervals of time. Now you should know about the medium, what actually is a medium. Medium is a substance that makes possible the transfer of energy from one particle to another, especially through waves. Medium can be a solid, liquid, or gases. Now moving towards the next part. Now in this animation, a water droplets fall on the surface of the water and creating ripple that spreads out. Now what do you learn from it? Think about it. By dropping the droplet of a water, the water surface gets disturbed, and due to this disturbance, ripples are produced. And this motion is known as your wave motion. Waves have two different types. One is your mechanical wave and other is your electromagnetic waves. Mechanical waves are those waves which require medium for their propagation. For example, water waves, sound wave, etc. Now what is the meaning of word propagation? Propagation means to travel, to move further. We use the word propagation for waves instead of using traveling or moving. Electromagnetic waves, waves which do not require a medium for its propagation. It means that medium is not a compulsion for it. They can move through the space as well. Radio waves, television waves, X-rays, etc. all are the examples of electromagnetic waves. Mechanical wave, according to the disturbance, are going to be divided into two different types. One is your transverse waves, other is your longitudinal waves. As you can see in the animation, the disturbance of the particle is going to be different. So they are categorized as transverse and longitudinal waves. Now I am going to discuss in detail the transverse waves and the longitudinal waves. First of all, we are going to discuss the definition and then explain the different characteristics which are associated with the waves. Likewise, transverse waves are defined as, in the case of transverse waves, the vibratory motion of the particle of the medium is perpendicular to the direction of propagation of the wave. As for example, transverse waves has two examples, water waves, slanky spring. In this animation, I am going to explain the transverse waves with the help of slanky spring, and it is a part of your syllabus as well. In this animation, you will see that a slanky spring is shaken up and down by hand movement. Although the disturbance is traveling in the forward direction, but you can clearly see that a rust arrow shows the direction of the propagation of the wave, whereas the red arrow shows the vibratory motion of the particle. And both arrows shows that the motion of the particle of the medium is perpendicular to the direction of propagation of the wave, which justifies the definition. Now moving towards the characteristics. The first characteristic I am going to discuss is crest and trough. A crest is the highest point of the medium, rises from their mean position, and a trough is the lowest point of the medium, sinks to form its mean position. As you can see a black line in the picture, this is the mean position, and you can see the wave which is traveling above the line and below the line. The portion which is above the line with the maximum height is known as the crest portion, and the lower portion with the maximum height is known as the trough part. Now the next characteristic is wavelength. It is the distance between two consecutive crest or troughs is called wavelength. Wavelength, if you want to understand the word wavelength, then a combination of a crest and a trough also makes a wavelength. This is the length of the wave. Or you can say the consecutive two peaks of crests or consecutive two peaks of the troughs are also known as wavelength. Wavelength is represented by a Greek letter lambda, as you can see in the picture, and it is measured in units centimeters or meters. Now we will discuss the next characteristic, that is frequency. It is basically the number of waves passing through a point in 1 second is called frequency. It is represented by small f and its units is hertz. As it is clear from the definition that frequency entirely depends upon the number of waves. Greater the number of waves, greater will be the frequency. Lower the number of waves, lower the frequency. Next is the time period. Time period is basically the time taken by a wave to pass through a point, and this is a complete wave, means a complete crest and a trough. The time taken by a wave to pass through a single point is known as time period. It is represented by capital T and its SI unit is seconds. Next characteristic is amplitude. Amplitude is basically the maximum distance from the mean point, maximum distance of the wave from the mean point. As you can see a plane line, and you will see a crest and a trough. Now we have two amplitude in a single wave. One appear with the crest and one appear with the trough. This is basically the maximum distance. It is represented by the line, and the amplitude for the crest is always positive, whereas the amplitude of the trough is always negative. Next is your longitudinal waves. Now you should know what actually is a longitudinal wave. We will discuss it by definition first, and then I am going to describe it with the help of slinky spring. Longitudinal waves. In longitudinal waves, the particle of the medium move back and forth along the direction of the propagation of the wave. As you can see in the animation that I used a slinky spring, and in regular periods I'll give it a push and pull quickly in the direction of its length. A series of disturbance in the form of wave will start moving along the length of the slinky spring. As you can see that there are some parts in the slinky spring in which the loops of the spring are close together. That parts are known as compressions, and where the loops are spaced apart are known as rarefactions. So, longitudinal waves are always travel in the form of compressions and rarefactions. Instead of moving in the form of crest and trough, they move in the form of compressions and rarefactions. As you can see that in the region of compression, particles of the medium are closer together, where in the region of rarefaction, particles of the medium are spaced apart. The compressions and rarefactions moves back and forth along the direction of the motion of the wave. As you can see that a rust arrow shows the direction of propagation or the velocity of the wave, and the red arrow shows the direction of the vibration of the particle. And you can see that both the movement, the velocity and the vibration of the particle, both are parallel to one another, which justify the definition. As we know that the longitudinal waves moves in the form of compressions and rarefactions, so the definition for the wavelength is going to be a little bit changed. It is the distance between two consecutive compressions or rarefactions are known as its wavelength. As you can see in the animation, that the compressed part where the particles of the medium are close together is known as compression. So the distance between two compressions is known as its wavelength, or the distance between two rarefactions is known as its wavelength. Next is your wave equation, which is a very important equation of this chapter. As we know that wave is produced by the disturbance in the medium, and it travels from one end to another, and it carries a specific velocity. So by using the definition of velocity, we have v is equals to d by t. What is d? D is the displacement and t is the time taken in which the wave travels. As we have already studied that we take the time of the wave as its time period and its distance traveled is used as a wavelength. So we can replace time by time period and displacement by wavelength, as you can see. So by replacing these two symbols, we have a new equation, that is v is equals to lambda by t. We also know a relation between time period and frequency in our first article, that is time period is equals to reciprocal of frequency. So by substituting the value in the above equation, we have v is equals to f lambda, and this is the basic equation of wave, and this is known as wave equation. Now get to another article which is known as your ripple tank. Ripple tank is very important to study different features of the wave, likewise reflection, refraction, diffraction, interference. But we are going to study in detail initially the ripple tank and then all these processes. What actually is a ripple tank? Ripple tank is a device to produce water waves and to study their characteristics. As you can see that in this apparatus, it consists of a rectangular tray having glass bottom. Waves are produced on the surface of the water present in the tray by means of a vibrator. The vibrator is an oscillating electric motor fixed on a wooden plate over the tray. When we set on the vibrator, this wooden plate starts to vibrate and it starts to generate plain water waves. An electric bulb is hung over the tray to observe the image of the water waves on the screen. And the crests and trough of the water waves appear as a bright and the dark lines on the screen, whereas bright lines shows the crest and dark line shows the trough of a wave. Now we will discuss different phenomena like reflection of the wave, refraction of the wave, and diffraction. Initially, we will discuss the reflection. To produce this process, reflection of the wave with the help of a ripple tank, what we have to do, we have to place a barrier in the ripple tank. The water waves will reflect from the barrier. If the barrier is placed at an angle to the wave front, the reflected waves can be seen to obey the law of reflection. What are the laws of reflection? As you can see in the figure, that an incident wave moving and strike the barrier and reflect back by moving certain angle. Now at the point of incident where the incident wave strikes the barrier, this point is known as the point of incident, which is represented by a red line. We draw a normal on it. What do the normal do? Normal is basically drawn just to bisect this angle into two equal halves. The angle formed between the normal and the incident wave is known as angle of incident, and the angle formed between reflected wave and the normal is known as angle of reflection. Now the first law of reflection is that angle of incident must be equal to angle of reflection. As you can see in the figure that a normal is drawn to bisect it into two equal halves, so it is understood that angle of incident must be equal to angle of reflection, which shows that first law is obeyed. What is the second law? Second law is that the angle of incident and the angle of reflection along with the normal at the point of incident all lie on the same plane. As you can see that the incident ray and the reflected ray both are in the same plane. So first law is also obeyed. Now we will see what actually is the definition of reflection. When waves moving in one medium fall on the surface of another medium, they bounce back into the first medium, such that the angle of incident is equal to the angle of reflection. This phenomena is called reflection of the wave. Next is your refraction. Refraction is the process when a wave from one medium enters into another medium. At some angle, its direction of travel change. This is known as refraction of wave. As you can see in the animation that an incident wave moving from one medium enters in the second medium. And you can see that the wavelength starts to change. In the first medium, the wavelength of the wave is greater, but when the wave enters in the second medium, the wavelength of the wave starts to decrease. And the second change, the wave changes its direction. Can you see it? Yes, the wave changes its path. Its direction is going to be changed. And the third most important point, that speed is also going to be changed. In the first medium, speed is high, and in the second medium, speed is low. So these are the factors which affecting the speed of the medium in the process of refraction. Number one, its wavelength, change in wavelength, change in direction, and change in speed. Three changes occur in a refraction. And what are these? Change in wavelength, change in wave speed, and change in direction. Next is your diffraction. What actually is diffraction? Diffraction is basically the bending or spreading of the wave around the sharp edges or corner of the obstacle is called diffraction. As you can see in the animation that we take the two hurdles and a plane wave is generated in one portion, and these waves have to pass through this hurdle and appear on the other side. As these waves passes through the hurdle, you will see that these straight waves are converted into semicircular waves. Why is that so? Because when these plane waves start passing through this hurdle, they will start bending because the gap between the two hurdles is less than the wavelength of the wave. So they bend from the edges and produces a semicircular wave. This is known as the diffraction of the wave. Now see the next picture. In picture A, if you are going to see that this curve or a bend is much lesser because the gap between the two hurdle is nearly equal to the wavelength of the wave. So that is why without any bending, the wave starts to pass. In figure B, you can see that this hurdle or the gap between the hurdle is lesser as compared to figure A. So you can see a clear bend in it. A semicircular waves are going to be appeared on it. And in figure C, the gap between the two hurdle is much smaller as compared to the wavelength of the wave. So that is why you will see a clear bend in the waves, which shows the diffraction of the wave while passing through a slit. If you are going to listen the video lecture carefully, you are able to solve all the questions and numerical problems by yourself. Wish you best of luck. Inshallah, we will meet in the next lecture.